I'm Rachel from 7 and All. I am a second-generation homeschooler who loves to make nerdy homeschool videos here on YouTube, and today we are going to be talking about planning language arts curriculum for the early elementary years, roughly 1st through 4th grade. About this today is because there's just something about the subject area of language arts that can leave you feeling a little bit like that conspiracy theorist meme guy that's like pointing to a wall and showing how all these lines and webs and ideas are connected. You know what I mean? There's just so many different strands and so many different elements, so many different skill sets that really work together to give us and to give our children and our students a very strong understanding of this beautiful English language that we speak, that we write, that we read, and all the elements of it. It is very multifaceted, and that can leave the parent feeling overwhelmed. So that's why I'm making this video, to talk through all of these elements. Unfortunately, I am not going to sit here and tell you a perfect plan and here's exactly what you need to do and exactly the resource you need to use. I'm not going to give you an answer as easy as that, just because it isn't as easy as that, but I do want to talk through some of your options and some major factors that you should be considering in how to build up these skills as your children grow through the early elementary years. So let's get started. Now, when it comes to language arts curriculum in the early years, you typically have two very major divergent options when it comes to curriculum and resources. On the one hand, you have the all-in-one language arts curriculums. And on the other hand, you have the approach of piecing it together, using different smaller resources that tackle certain skill set areas, certain smaller areas within the umbrella of language arts, pulling together multiple resources to meet all the needs of your student. These are your two big options. So between those two big options, you're going to have to go one way or the other, or find your own unique approach between these. So I want to begin by just talking a little bit about the pros and the cons of all-in-one language arts curriculum versus piecing together smaller resources. First up, all-in-one language arts curriculum. The big pro is that it just sounds so appealing, doesn't it? You buy one curriculum and spelling is covered, reading instruction, reading comprehension. We've got all of it. We've got the vocabulary development, we've got writing instruction, all these little parts and pieces that have been weighing on your mind. It's supposed to be right there in the curriculum. That can be very appealing, just the simplicity, the ability to click purchase and know, okay, this whole subject area is covered. However, on the con side, sometimes that idea just doesn't translate that well in reality. Not all the time, it can work, but the practical application of an all-in-one curriculum really functioning very well for a student, it tends to be a little bit more complicated in real life, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that certain curriculums, they just naturally tend to be stronger in one area than in another area within the umbrella of language arts. And I'll use the example of Abeka, because my family used Abeka language arts for many years. Now, Abeka uses multiple books, but Abeka itself can be a complete language arts curriculum. They have different workbooks for every subject area. And Abeka is very, very strong in its traditional grammar instruction. You come out of Abeka, you will know everything there is to know about punctuation, commas, and all of that. At least I did. If you actually study your books and can learn this way, you can learn it very easily. However, I would argue that Abeka is not really the strongest when it comes to writing instruction and really having everything that you need in the books itself to get your kid writing confidently and fluently over the years. So that's just one example where an all-in-one curriculum can be stronger in one of these strands than in another one. Another example can be spelling. Many times families who are using all-in-one curriculum find out, oh, they don't really like the pace of the spelling, or they might not really jive with the approach used to spelling in that curriculum, and so they end up pulling in something different to do spelling. One other con of all-in-one curriculum is that it can be hard to really meet your child and your student at the right level in all of these subject areas within an all-in-one curriculum. And I will give an example here, and I'll use the all-in-one language arts from Sunlight. I was recently looking at Sunlight Language Arts. I love a lot of what Sunlight has to offer, but I was looking at Sunlight Language Arts and thinking of my own son going into first grade next year. And I'm looking at the readers. The first grade readers he can already do easily in early kindergarten. I'm looking at the second grade readers and I'm thinking, yeah, I think those will be very doable for him by the time he's in first grade. However, I look at the sample for the rest of the second grade language arts program and I'm thinking, I feel like the spelling level that's expected and I feel like the writing level that's expected in the second grade program is definitely going to be over the head of a first grader, of my son, at least when he's in first grade. So for him, at least, the levels wouldn't match up of what he's expected to do in reading, according to that program, and then what he would be expected to do in spelling and in writing. So that's kind of an example of what I'm talking about, that sometimes just for that individual child, because some children do progress in reading faster than they do in their writing skills, or they might just be at different skill levels in different strands within language arts, which can make it tough to use an all-in-one curriculum very effectively. Now, as far as specific curriculums that you can look into if you are looking for an all-in-one curriculum, I'll just name a couple. There are many options, really, but The Good and the Beautiful is very famous for their language arts curriculum, which is available for free if you opt for the PDF version, and it is an all-in-one curriculum. Sunlight has an all-in-one language arts, as I mentioned. Becca is an all-in-one language arts, although the pieces can be sold separately. You can also buy them all together and use all of those pieces together from Becca to create a complete language arts curriculum. Learning language arts through literature is another all-in-one language arts curriculum, and there are many others. Some of these all-in-one curriculums are much more workbook based, some are more literature and copywork based. There's a variety and there's a mix of approaches, but those are just a few of your options. Now let's talk about the approach of piecing together language arts curriculum and some of the pros and the cons of that. Okay, the big pro is kind of the opposite of all-in-one curriculum. It's the ability to customize the level and customize the approach within different subject areas. If your child is reading at a higher level, you can give them a higher level of reading curriculum. If your child is spelling at a particular level, or spelling just fits with their brain better with a certain approach, whether it's the spelling you see approach or whether it's a more traditional approach from Evan Moore, you can choose the approach and the level that fits your child best for each different subject area. That is a pro. Now, on the other hand, the cons of this approach is, one, it can feel quite overwhelming as the homeschool planner, as the mom, to be thinking, okay, I'm using this curriculum for this subject, I'm using this curriculum for this subject within language arts, using all these different workbooks or different resources. Pulling it all together can feel a little bit overwhelming. It can feel a little bit impractical to implement on an everyday basis. Another con is that you might end up having this niggling feeling that you might be missing something. You might be missing some little aspect of language arts somewhere. Whereas when you're using an all-in-one curriculum, you kind of feel like it's a safety net of sorts that, oh, if it isn't being worked on or taught right now, it'll cycle up in a future lesson. So you can kind of feel that safety net when you're following an all-in-one curriculum versus when you're piecing it together. You can kind of have that niggling worry or feeling of responsibility that, am I missing something somewhere? And you might also end up adding on too much in one subject because you might go a little bit workbook crazy and end up with multiple workbooks that are really covering the same type of stuff within language arts. So it can be a little bit tricky. There are some cons that you might have to work through, but it's not necessarily a bad option. Neither one of these is a bad option, either all-in-one or piecing it together. You just have to figure out what is going to be the best fit for you, your homeschool, and your child. Now, to just give you an example of what piecing it together might look like, There are obviously endless iterations and combinations. There are so many language arts resources out there. But just for example, to look at first grade language arts, perhaps for the gentle grammar portion, introduction to grammar, punctuation, capitalization, maybe you choose first language lessons from the Well-Trained Mind. But that is just learning about kind of the science of language. It doesn't really include spelling explicitly, and it doesn't include a lot of reading. You know, you're not having reading assignments as part of that, or phonics instruction, so you're going to have to get those from other sources. So you pick up a different workbook for your spelling lists, maybe an Evan Moore workbook, maybe an Abeka workbook, whatever you choose, whatever fits with you. Maybe spelling UC, that's a fun option. So you pick up a spelling workbook, and then for your reading, you adapt it to the level of your child. Do you need a phonics program to work through to learn phonics, or do you just want to have a book list and work on reading through early chapter books with your child? What fits your child best? And then maybe you throw in an Explode the Code workbook in there because they're awesome, they're fun, they're quick and easy phonics practice, something like that. That is an example of what piecing it together might look like at a first grade level. All right, now that I've talked about all-in-one curriculum as well as piecing it together, I want to chat a little bit about all the different strands that are involved in language arts education and just kind of plant some seeds of ideas to get you thinking about how to choose what's going to fit your family and your homeschool the best. First of all, I want to point out that in language arts, there very much is a natural progression of skills, and you will be gradually adding on more and more of different strands within language arts as your children grow in their skill set. A lot of people are very worried about building writing skills, and even in early elementary years. And I would say, don't really worry about the writing skills yet, because there's so many foundational skills that will make it possible for writing to really happen and to happen skillfully later on. So work on the foundations first. You really don't need to start every strand of language arts from the very beginning. The things that to me are the most important to solidify really before you start diving into all the rest, those things are phonics, getting your children reading fluently, reading pretty confidently, as well as handwriting, basic handwriting, getting your kids able to write by hand and have phonics skills at least good enough that they feel relatively confident with spelling, even if their confidence is occasionally misplaced. But getting that phonics skills, reading skills, and their handwriting skills down, that's the basis. So with kindergarten and maybe even early first grade, I wouldn't go all that much beyond those skills. I wouldn't really worry so much about the rest of it. I don't tend to worry a lot in homeschool anyways, but I'm trying to communicate. Focus on those foundational basics, and then as those become mastered, you can add in more and more. Now, there can be some caveats to this, because for some children, learning phonics and learning how to read will be a very long journey. For children who have dyslexia and learning disabilities, you will find that as they get older, you do need to start adding in some grammar instruction, adding in punctuation instruction, adding in more of these strands. Just because they are getting older, these are subjects that they do need to understand, even if they're still working on reading. But if you have a younger, more typical learner who seems to be picking up reading fairly fast, I would just kind of hone in on phonics for the most part and not really worry about doing too much with other elements of language arts until we can get those phonics really solid. Now, when it comes to grammar, punctuation, spelling, handwriting, all of those kind of strands, you are going to have to think about what is the approach that you as a teacher really jive with and really believe in, but also you need to think about what is the approach that really works effectively for your student. Because the simple reality is that sometimes the learning philosophy that we believe in as parents and teachers and the learning philosophy we've bought into doesn't actually match our children's brains and doesn't actually match what is effective for them. So don't hold too closely to your ideas of this is the best way to teach spelling when it becomes obvious that a different way actually just works much more effectively for your student. Again, within these types of subject areas, there tends to be two major camps. One is explicit teaching of rules, which can happen through workbooks, through memorization, a lot of an approach that heavily focuses on teaching all of the rules for grammar, for capitalization, for punctuation, for spelling. And on the other side, we have the much more implicit learning approach, which focuses much more on just reading good books and doing copywork and really seeing copywork as the key to learning grammar, learning punctuation, capitalization, spelling. So there's one that focuses much more on explicit teaching and one that focuses much more on implicit teaching and using copywork as a huge tool for learning. Me, you guys should know this about me, I'm not a purist when it comes to education. I am all about what works. What I have seen to be very effective is usually actually a mix of this. I am not afraid of workbooks or explicit instruction. I actually think these are often very helpful, and many students thrive with learning explicit rules and having these communicated and getting to do explicit practice with these rules. But I also think that reading good books is incredibly powerful in learning. I also think that copywork can be a very great exercise, but its effectiveness will depend a little bit on your student. Some kids will really thrive with the copywork approach. They are going to make connections from that. They are going to see what's going on with the grammar and punctuation. They're going to listen to you when you're pointing out what's going on. And then other kids are just going to race through the copywork and not really pay attention, and they will do much better with the more explicit teaching. So my personal approach tends to be a blend. You don't have to choose one side or the other. There are strengths in both explicit and implicit teaching and instruction and learning. So I try to choose the strengths of both. The next subject area I want to talk about is phonics, which grows to become reading and reading comprehension and engagement with reading as your child grows in their reading fluency. I personally do believe that in general, a very thorough approach to phonics instruction is the best. I think that the outcomes can be very, very good as far as long-term decoding skills as well as spelling skills, because many children are able to take what they've learned in phonics and apply it to being able to spell in the future. Although their reading skills typically do outpace their spelling skills for the first couple of years. For me, when it comes to reading, probably the biggest priority in choosing reading and reading curriculum, reading books, is actually interesting books. The quality and the humor and the variety, diversity, and just pure interesting books that are worthwhile to read. The reality is that a lot of early readers and a lot of reading curriculums can sometimes choose some rather boring books. I've been around in homeschool for 30 years, so I've done my time with the boring books. To me, interest is so motivational for the young reader. So that is a big priority. That's something I really look for, is just purely interesting books, funny books, books that are like, hey, the child wants to keep reading and they want to keep doing more instead of feeling like it's a chore. That is something I really tend to look for with early reading books. That's something I do like about All About Reading, their programs, is that their readers are genuinely engaging. They do include that humor. They do include that motivation to keep the child turning to the next page. That's something that they do quite well, and that's something that can be missing from some reading curriculums. When it comes to reading comprehension, you again have multiple options. In the early years, you might opt for oral narrations, having your child read something and then tell you back what they read, tell you back in their own words a summary of what they read. You can write down their narrations. As they get older, you can have them begin to write down simple narrations of what they have read. That's actually something I did a lot when I was a young elementary student, because I was pretty advanced in writing. My mom, and because I read a ton of books, my mom would have me read books and write summaries of every chapter. I tend to like that very natural approach of narration, moving from oral narration to written narrations, but there are also workbook approaches to reading comprehension, where you can read a passage and take a multiple choice test or take a short test based on that. And some kids thrive better with that approach. So figuring out which approach is going to work best realistically for your family is going to matter, but reading comprehension is not something to ignore. Some kids naturally click on to comprehending what they're reading at the same time that they're reading it, but for other kids, it can be a much longer journey. They can be putting so much energy into decoding that they kind of forget to understand what they read. So it's not something to ignore. It will come more naturally to some kids than to others, but it's worth paying attention to whether you take a narration approach or more of a testing and workbook approach. Either one can be effective. The next step is writing, the big boogeyman of language arts instruction. And first off, I want to take kind of a burden off of your shoulders, homeschooling parent of an early elementary child. Actually, I would say that from 1st grade to 4th grade, writing is the part of language arts that I would put the least focus on. Some young elementary students will be very eager and very able to write at these young ages. Some will be writing pages and pages of stories, and some won't. That's largely going to depend on the student, but be very aware that the ability to write and to write well requires many, many skills working together. It requires a lot of confidence that has to be built through having all of these different foundational skills with vocabulary, with grammar, with actual handwriting, with spelling, with understanding the way stories work, with understanding how flow works. There's a lot that has to work together. So really, I only would get into, for thinking of a typical child, thinking of a typical progression, I'd really only start getting into more serious writing instruction, serious writing assignments at about 5th grade and above. So during these 1st through 4th grade years, we're really just laying the foundation. We're laying the foundation. We're building all of these different layered skills that are going to have to work together for solid writing later on. We're building up gradually. First, can we write a complete sentence? Do we understand all the pieces and parts that make up a complete sentence? From that point, can we build on to a couple complete sentences? Can we build on and make a paragraph? Can we build on and write a couple of paragraphs? Can we make sure that those paragraphs make sense in the order that they are? Can we pay attention to order as we're summarizing a story when we're doing our oral narrations or our written narrations? One tool that I think is incredibly helpful during these early elementary years is to do notebooking for your history or for your science or different content-based curriculums that you're using. I love content-based writing, and notebooking isn't so much of giving a specific writing assignment, but it's typically more of, okay, we learned about this today. We read this interesting book today. We found out cool information. So now let's do something about that information. And as your child grows, that might grow from them telling you about what they learned and you writing it down to them gradually maybe writing part of it, writing the first sentence, writing the first 2 sentences, and you can complete the writing. And they just grow in their ability and their ownership of their own notebooking exercises. That to me is probably the major type of writing I would be doing during these early years. Of course, it's going to depend on your child. Some of them are just going to love writing and find themselves writing journals and letters and all sorts of little articles and creative things all the time. I highly encourage creativity, but as far as formal or more academic writing, I really don't start that in these years. These are the years for building all the foundational skills that will work together to make strong writers later. I hope that this video is helpful. If you have any questions or more comments and ideas on language arts for the early elementary years, please leave them down in the comments below, and give this video a like and subscribe if you love to listen to nerdy homeschool videos. I'll see you next time. Bye.